Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and welcome to a new vlog. I decided to cheat and do my mid-month book bash this weekend, which is July the 15th, today, Friday. So the 15th through 16th, 17th, 18th. Even though it was actually last weekend, I was not able to do it last weekend. So I figured, well, why not do it this weekend? Because I only have to work this morning, and then I will be off for the weekend, and we are going to go to our camp on the lake. So it seemed like, appropriate time to do mid-month book bash. So I will be focusing on my current read for the Book 2 Prize, Crying in Mart by Michelle Zauner, which I won't be able to talk about, but just so you know, this is my goal, to finish this. I'm on page 78, and it's only like 240 pages long. It's a memoir. I am reading in nonfiction for this round and every round, always. So this is my priority for this weekend. And obviously, I think I can finish that. I am also buddy reading A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki with Joe Smith. And this is a reread for me. I read it a couple of years ago. But because Joe and I had been reading through all of Ruth Ozeki's work, and we didn't read that one together. We wanted to read it together. So finding it very interesting, only about like 110 pages into it, but there's a lot of similarities with the other works that I've read with Ruth Ozeki. And it's really nice now that I've read all of her other stuff to sort of see the themes that she keeps coming back to in her books. So I'm enjoying that. And then the other things I'm working on are Pale Rider, The Spanish Flu of 1918 and How It Changed the World by Laura Spinney. I had started this book a couple weeks ago at the beginning of July, and then I read the first 85 pages, and I think I just read them like in a fog because I couldn't remember anything about them. I set it down for a few days and I couldn't remember anything about it. So I've restarted this book, and I'm only on page like 25 at this point. And so I've really wanted to read this since I read The Great Influenza, and I really enjoyed that book an awful lot. So hopefully this one will be as good as that one by John Barry. And then my other current read is The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt by Edmund Morris. This is book 1 in his 3-book trilogy about Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt is my current read from my presidential reading challenge. And I'm really enjoying this biography. It's very well written. Teddy Roosevelt was a very interesting person, very contradictory person. And Morris really is like bringing him to life. He jumps off the page as a character. This could almost be fiction. This is not in the way that the book's written, but in that Theodore Roosevelt just does not seem like he could have possibly been a real person. He's just such a larger than life character. So I am 330 pages into this like 750 page biography, and it reads very, very quickly and smoothly. So I'm enjoying that. I don't know what else I will get up to this weekend. I need to start Mansfield Park by Jane Austen for Jane Austen July. That's the only Jane Austen that I have yet to read. So I definitely want to try to get to that this month, but I don't know what else I'll get to over the weekend. We shall see together. Saturday. I'm out here in the screen house with my tea. It's Saturday morning. I've exercised, I've showered, I'm feeling good, and I wanted to check in because I finished Crying in Mart by Michelle Zauner yesterday. This was the 5th book that I needed to read in my group for the BookTube prize, so I can't talk about my thoughts about it, but it was lovely to sit outside here at camp in my lounge chair in the sunshine yesterday afternoon and read this memoir. So that was finished yesterday. Today I plan to focus on Pale Rider, which is a nonfiction book about the 1918 flu. So I'm hoping to make some really good progress in this. I'm only on about page 48 or something like that. So that's what I'll be focusing on today, as well as reading the next 4 sections of A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki, which I'm buddy reading with Joe Smith. And this is a reread for both of us. And one thing that we're finding really interesting is the overlap between A Tale for the Time Being and a book of Form and Emptiness, which is her most recent novel, which we read together last fall. And so there's some direct parallels between those 2 books, and it's really interesting to think of A Tale for the Time Being, which sort of was published like 7 or 8 years ago, and this book that was published just last year, and some of the themes and topics that Ozeki's been sort of pondering, obviously, and developing in her mind as she develops her craft. So it's really been really fun to notice those things and also to refresh ourselves on the storyline, which is about a young girl in Japan who's writing a diary about her life. She was taken to the United States when she was very young, like a baby, and her dad had a job over in California, and he gets laid off, and they move back home to Japan when she's like a preteen, and how difficult the transition is for her, who feels herself to be American, to come back to Japan and try to fit in Japanese culture. And while her parents are really struggling, her dad can't find a job and all this. So she's writing this diary. Ostensibly, our main character on the American side, Ruth, is a middle-aged woman who's found this diary washed up on the shore in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. And she's reading the diary and pondering all the things that now the young teenage Japanese girl is discussing. So you get these 2 parallel storylines, one from the past, one in the present day. And it's really talking about time and what time means and how to be present in your life and all those sorts of things in a very Ruth Ozeki kind of way, touching on a lot of the same themes that Ruth Ozeki does touch on in her novels: mental illness, environmental issues, family dynamics, these sorts of things, reading and books and the importance of reading and books, Buddhism. So it's really fun to see a lot of the themes that we've noticed in her past books being very strongly discussed in A Tale for the Time Being. Anyway, that's what I'm going to be getting up to today. It's going to be hopefully a very nice, relaxing, lazy day at camp. It's supposed to be quite warm. It's already feeling very humid, so I probably will not be I would be trying not to spend too much time in the direct sun, because I think I got a little bit much sun yesterday sitting in my lounge chair reading. So I'm going to try to be a little bit better today and keep myself in the shade a little bit more. So I will check in with you later. So it's Sunday evening, and I finished another book. I finished Pale Rider, The Spanish Flu of 1918 and How It Changed the World by Laura Spinney. This book came out in 2017, and it is a little bit insane about how prophetic it was. That was one thing that I just kept marking in the book. You can see all my little tabs that I marked, places where we did not listen to the advice of the experts in terms of getting prepared for another pandemic. So this book is all about the history of the 1918 flu, what's most commonly known as the Spanish flu, but did not originate in Spain at all. So there is still some controversy over where it did originate. There's like basically three main schools of thought about where it originated, and there's some evidence for each of those theories, but that isn't conclusive yet, although we keep getting closer and closer to knowing with new technologies about gene mapping and things like that allow us to go back and take tissue samples that was stored from the time of 1918 and during the flu pandemic and studying those with new genetic and molecular techniques, which is pretty fascinating. But also fascinating is basically the state of science at the time of the 1918 flu, what people knew and didn't know about what caused flu. They didn't know that flu was caused by a virus. They thought it was caused by a bacteria, which it is not. So they didn't even know what to look for. And there was some controversy over what the flu actually was in different parts of the world. They thought it was the plague. They thought it was other things. In some areas, they thought it was retribution called down on them for not being godly enough or not for sinning too much. So there was lots of different experiences during the flu in terms of where you lived and how you experienced the illnesses. But it was incredibly detrimental to basically the everyday running of life. So 1 in 10 people died during this pandemic. Lots of people got sick from it. Most people that got sick recovered, but 1 in 10 people is a lot. So in some places, the death toll was even higher than that. So, in terms of comparing it to COVID, clearly, the death rates have not been as high as they were in this time period. But of course, we have a lot more medicine and a lot more technology to help people survive things than existed in 1918. In 1918, there was no penicillin, there was no treatment. Basically, all you could do was care for people and hope that they pulled through. So that was all really, really fascinating. But what was the most interesting to me about this book was where the author describes the social measures that were put in place to try to contain the flu at that time in 1918. And they were basically the same things that were tried during COVID-19. So, social distancing, major public entertainment venues were shut down, public transportation was shut down, people were asked to stay home, people were asked to wear masks. There was some vaccines available at the time. Of course, they weren't vaccines for the flu, but they were vaccines that could protect against secondary infections that you might catch from after the flu. So there were some places where vaccinations were imposed on people, and that was very controversial. So yeah, lots of similarities between what happened then and what happened now. And then, experts in pandemics and infectious diseases have been calling for governments to be prepared for the next big pandemic for years and years and years. And it's really disheartening to realize how ill-prepared most countries and governments were to deal with the pandemic that we just experienced in the last 2 years, when all of the experts clearly laid out the steps that needed to be taken as far as like having the medical community be robust, making sure you had plenty of PPE, or what we call PPE now, or like protective gear available for your medical personnel, making sure that your medical personnel don't get burnt out by making sure there's plenty of staff available to help manage all of the patients that you're going to have, making sure you have enough facilities with all the best that you can provide at the time, medical equipment, like all of these things we knew that we needed, and yet we were still woefully unprepared. We're really not great humans in general are really not great at learning from history. So we'll see how much we've learned from what we've gone through in the past 2 years with the COVID-19 pandemic. But I'm going to bet that if it takes another 50, 75, 100 years before another worldwide pandemic happens, we'll have forgotten many of the lessons we learned during this pandemic as well. So yeah, excellent book if you want to learn more about the 1918 flu in particular, or if you want to learn about how transmissible disease, contagious disease spreads, and then what governments have done in the past to try to deal with that issue. And the other thing that this book talks about that I thought was really interesting is how different things were in different countries. So there's a survey of experiences in countries all around the world and how those different countries experienced the flu pandemic. And it was really interesting. Countries that were even side by side to one another had vastly different experiences when it came to how many people died, and how the government or how the centralized authority dealt with the sickness. So that was really interesting as well. So highly recommend Pale Rider by Laura Spinney if you're into that kind of nonfiction read, which I am, obviously. So I've also been reading in A Tale for the Time Being, as Joe and I continue our buddy read, but I won't be finished with that by the end of the mid-month book bash. I have one more day. I have started my audiobook, my newest audiobook, and that is Abandoned in Death by J.D. Robb, which is book, I think, 54 in the Eve Dallas mystery series. So that's always fun. I'm always excited to start a new Eve Dallas book, and I will be listening to that as I am out and about working tomorrow. Good morning. It's Tuesday, July 19th, and I figured I better close out my mid-month book bash vlog, which actually ended for me yesterday, the 18th, but it was a very busy day and I never got back to it. Apologies for how my eyes look. My allergies are just so bad. I don't know what's blooming or going to seed at the moment, but it's playing havoc with my eyes. At the moment. Yesterday was particularly bad. Anyway, enough of that. How did I do? I did really well this weekend. I finished 2 books. I finished Crying in H Mart for the BookTube Prize. I finished Pale Rider by Laura Spinney, which was the book about the 1918 flu pandemic. I made great progress in my book, my biography of Teddy Roosevelt. This is The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt by Edmund Morris, which is volume 1 in his 3-book biography series of Theodore Roosevelt. I'm on page 438 of like 800 pages. I think 800 page biography. So really, really well done. Very interesting. Theodore Roosevelt is just a larger than life figure. He's very contradictory. He is really excellent at some things and really poor at other things, but he's a fascinating character, and the way that Morris is writing him just makes this a page turner for me. And then I also made really good progress in my buddy read, which is A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki, a reread for me, but I am on page 260 of that novel, and we'll be continuing my buddy read with Joe. Probably won't finish that one before next weekend, I wouldn't think. What else? Oh, I started an audiobook. I started Abandoned in Death by J.D. Robb, which is book 54 in the Eve Dallas mystery series. And I am 58% of the way through that. I had to do quite a bit of driving for work yesterday, so I listened to the majority of that while I was driving to and from where I needed to be, and it's fantastic. It's so good. It's just such a pleasure to read a book in a long-running series that you love the characters in. It's just a comfort, and so nice to have these relationships and this setting and this like familiar rhythm to the story. It's just a great deal of fun, and I'm really enjoying that on audio. So, highly successful mid-month book bash. I'm so glad that I took the time to really focus on my reading this past weekend and to get really stuck into a bunch of great books and get through some books. So I will look forward to joining you again next month for a mid-month book bash in August. I know, can't believe it, halfway through the summer already. God. I'll talk to you later.